So the idea that eventually we will all end up, all cultures eventually who want to be free will end up as a Western culture. I wouldn't say it's wise to say that.
Pan-African Review is a platform that challenges assumptions about Africa and a space for introspective perspectives on matters of concern to Africans.
Yeah, thank you. But I wanted to ask, Ndayisaba, is that when I told my dad now, he said, "Oh, that's Randy's name." But I read up that you're Burundian.
Yeah,
but
I'm
is it
Burundi,
Randy's name?
I'm from Burundi. Although
Okay.
currently,
So
I think I see myself as a almost complete East African. I'm a Burundian. I've lived for 10
right.
years in Rwanda, and now I'm in Kenya. I've been in Kenya for what, 5 years now, almost 6. So, I'm going around.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. It's nice to meet you. And obviously, this topic of abortion in Africa, you actually wrote this a couple of years ago in July
Yeah,
2022.
now,
So what was the initial reaction to your article from any friends or family, colleagues who might have read it? What was the...
Well, let me tell you, it was not even that. There's not a lot of reaction because I guess, and again, we had a discussion with one of the columnists, one of the editors of Pan-African Review, because I was really not bringing the debate of for and against. It was really not about that. It was more of how would I say, like a description of how we should actually approach the question of for and against somehow. Right. So as like laying the foundation about how we should converse about it as Africans, not just throwing ourselves into the for and against. I find that it's a very simplistic approach of such an important issue, societal issue, Right. So it was more of do we even have the tools to take sides?
Right.
And again, do we even have these tools?
Yeah, that's how I read your article. I didn't think it was it sounded like a study, this is a doctor's opinion. So to start us off, you wrote that 2010 to 2014, the rate of safe abortions in Africa was only 15%. Safe abortions was only 15% compared to the global average rate of 56%. So what are the causes for such a disparity?
Let me give you a background and so that maybe the listener can have an idea of what you're talking about. Now, for abortions, they are classified into 2 categories. Of course, there are many types, technically or clinically, medically. I'm actually I'm a gynecologist. Right. Maybe that's why most of my articles on health matters is around women's health somehow. I wrote one for cervical cancer, for abortion, one for delivery, types of delivery, and et cetera, et cetera. So the point is for abortions, they are categorized into 2. There is safe abortions and unsafe abortions. So safe abortions are abortions that are actually procured in a safe, medically speaking, environment, which means it's controlled. There's an asepsis followed to minimize infections. There's specific guidelines followed, specific instruments.
That comes from legalization and regulation. Right.
Exactly. And now it's unsafe now. The unsafe one now, it's, you just go anywhere or you just use anything as long as you are taking that pregnancy out. Right. Now it comes with complications, obviously, which I believe we'll discuss. Now, back to your question. Now, the question actually is comparing the Africa states in approach on abortion and the rest of the world, mainly the West, because they produced most of the research, or at least we access most of their research.
Right.
And again, because most of the debate, the other side of the debate, which is mainly for, it's coming also from there. So right. yeah, that's essentially that. Now, first of all, by experience, because that's my life, that's my work, that's what I do for life as a profession, you will realize the more you practice as a gynecologist or generally speaking as a medical doctor, that abortions will happen, whether you legalize them or not. The reason why now, back to the core of your question, the reason why in Africa, the rate of safe abortion is very low compared to the rest of the world is because the platform for providing safe abortion is not there. There's no legal platform, and therefore no medical platform, no centers or no guidelines to provide that.
Right.
That's why abortion is really a societal issue. It's not really about medicine. Of course, there is that part, obviously, the technical part, but the very center of the debate is societal. And actually, that's what is at the core of my article. It was to bring the conversation in society on how to approach it, not just to ignore it on the basis of culture. And it's happening, it's real, it's there. So you can't just ignore it and then say, it's okay, we will deal with it. And statistic numbers are there, we are not dealing with it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And
I can understand.
Okay.
I get what you're saying because you mentioned you're a gynecologist, and I was sort of reading up on you now before we got started. So, as a professional who deals with these issues on a day-to-day basis through reproduction and through your research and studies, what have you learned about the various approaches that African nations take? You said you're a citizen of East Africa. We could limit the scope there. What are the different approaches when it comes to addressing sexual and reproductive health within the different communities? Like, what practices do you notice?
Okay, let me give you an example. I've practiced more specifically women's medicine, let me call it that way, in two main countries. In Rwanda, where I was trained as an undergraduate as a medical doctor and practiced there for 3 years before coming to Kenya now to specialize now about that specifically. So abortion, currently we will find most of the people use the word miscarriage because, again, abortion has been termed as a bad thing, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So we are dealing only with miscarriages or abortion on request, mainly on request, because there are some specific cases where there is an unviable fetus growing, which with a lot of malformations. In that case, usually those cases are apart because most of the countries, rarely, few, like 4 to 5 countries, again, I've mentioned it in my article, 4 to 5 countries in Africa, more specifically, actually prohibit any form of miscarriage, even those, what we call therapeutic abortions. But mainly, generally speaking, there's a consensus that for specific cases such as an unviable fetus, unviable for life, I mean, and then a pregnancy that is threatening the life of the mother, in those cases, they are somehow apart because there is a general idea on that is okay. But we're dealing with, my discussion was specifically on abortions on request, which means you have a pregnancy and you just don't want to carry on. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
When that baby has a lot of anomalies, malformations, so that those malformations will not eventually be compatible to life, even if we let the pregnancy carry on.
Yeah.
Instead of submitting the mother to all that journey, and at the end, again, you all know that, this is not life really. It won't add up to life. That's one case. Second case, and you will find that those are, I wouldn't say rare case, but it's very, very few compared to the general, pregnancy rate.
Right.
And second case, whether that pregnancy is bringing complication to the mother. Now we have cases of high blood pressure in pregnancy called preeclampsia, high blood sugar, and many more other issues that actually that pregnancy could actually kill the mother, the woman.
Right.
Now those are that's why we call them therapeutic abortions. It means it's actually needed. If we don't do this, something bad will happen. Now that's the first category. The other one now, there is no risk factors, there is nothing. I just want to remove the pregnancy because, period. So, now that's where most of the debate is. Actually, the debate we've been hearing, we've been having in our societies, in our metropoles, it's not even in all our countries, it's specific cities. Those that are exposed to the Western societies and everything. So it's mostly on abortion on request. It's actually it's actually a term that is legal, abortion on request.
Okay.
So yeah, that was to answer your question.
No, I get that. And you also said it's like a cultural issue, how to deal with abortion. It sort of defines how you view the issue of women's reproduction or just reproduction in general. So you wrote that in your article that the taboo approach adopted by Africa when it comes to sex education has lost its intrinsic power and purpose. So what do you think that is? Is it like the modern social media, people being exposed to a lot more? Why is that? Why is it lost its
that's a very good question. And because it's a question that I will have to go back a bit to give you an idea of why I actually said it that way.
Right.
So we have an approach in Africa. Generally, again, you would find some exceptions, but generally speaking, in Africa, we would find that sexual discussions, sexual subjects are somehow confined into the private, the mystical or private areas of our families, even. Not even societies, families. It's very personal. You would find maybe they bring it up when maybe you are done with your studies, you're starting to earn some money. Now your parents try to approach you to tell you, you should now think about what's next, families and everything. Right. And then they introduce the sexual subject. So it's not something you grow up discussing, laughing about in your family, asking questions, whatever. Generally, again, people will say, no, I grew up differently. Okay, it's okay. But generally speaking, considering that most of our people in Africa are from the rural space, the rural settings, and those are the majority, like vast majority. So I'm not even talking about the capital cities, about Arusha, Bujumbura, Kigali, Nairobi. No. We are the minorities, quote unquote. It's a vast one. Now, that's the first setting. Now, as the world, I guess, progressed, the exchange of information actually grew. So it actually grew, people with smartphones, with laptops, with this Zoom. So you can easily access to what a person in 5,000 kilometers from you is thinking, is questioning. Right. Question that you wouldn't even think about in your society. People asking them at 15 years old, 14, 20, 21. So the very fact that initially that information or the opening up that discussion was somehow held by the parents or the elders somehow. Now they do not have that power anymore. It's out of their hands. You cannot hide that subject anymore now. Yeah. Because the moment your kid is going to school, is a teenager, is 15, 14, is discussing with other kids who have smartphones. Even if you say, no, I don't allow my kid to be exposed to social media. Okay, but your kids have friends. And maybe those friends get exposed to that. And when they're discussing, they also get exposed to that. Yeah. So in the long run, you realize that that taboo approach, again, is not working. The tools that we have now cannot allow the taboo approach to have any meaning. There's no meaning anymore. You cannot say, I want to discuss this with my child, because that if you don't, someone will. Yeah. And probably someone actually already did. So that's why I'm saying the taboo approach has its intrinsic value. The very purpose of not discussing that in fear that your kids might abuse it, it doesn't make sense anymore because you're not in control of the information anymore. Now, that is why actually I say that we should be more smart. We should be smarter than that now. Yeah. We should actually be the first now to introduce that with our own narrative, with our own way of presenting that. Yes.
Yeah, and I like how diplomatic you were actually with the article. I'm going to quote you here when you write. Many Africans would argue that Western approach to sex education has gone beyond its goal and openly rendered sexual activities meaningless by promoting the idea that one can engage in them with anyone, even strangers. So, if we were to frame sexual education as a societal issue and confront cultural barriers accordingly, how do we allay those fears of those who argue that the Western approach to sex education has gone beyond its goal, as you claimed, and makes sexual activities meaningless. So how do we tell people that we need to be open to abortions because the West tells us, and then you look at the cultures in the West, and they have their own versions of, depravity too. Because everyone's trying to find a balance with it. You can have those unsafe abortions all the way to, oh, sex is meaningless, do it everywhere. So how do you sell that to Africans as a
that's a really good question. And I would actually give my opinion, but this needs really a bigger discussion, bigger time frame.
30 minutes.
Yeah, it's okay, I know, right? But I'll preface this with my answer with this. And again, this is really debatable. That's the whole point of having policies, engaging the public and everything. But my preface is this. The idea that the natural evolvement or natural how societies naturally grow is towards the Western approach of life, I believe it's absolutely wrong. It's simplistic. You are limiting your culture. You're not allowing yourself for your culture to actually give you ways of thinking about life as your own culture, as you as a person, as a culture, as a people. So the idea that eventually we will all cultures eventually who want to be free will end up as a Western culture. I wouldn't say it's wise to say that. Now, that's one. Now, responding to your question now, first of all, there are basic stuff we're not even doing before even coming to that kind of discussion. And I think I actually mentioned it in my article that before you even come to that, there are basic things we are missing, and basic things that would actually have a bigger, stronger impact. First of all, we have to own the narrative of sexual education in our countries. We have to own it. You have to create the content of sexual education in our own view as communities. You own your narrative. And this is actually a response of the earlier question you asked me about the taboo approach losing its intrinsic value.
Right.
Now that we know that this approach of not mentioning it up to when someone is 30, 25, whatever, we know that this does not work because they are exposed to that even way earlier now. Let's own it. Let's start now. The moment they are teenagers or 12, 14, whatever, let's start it now with our own narrative, with our own cultural aspect to that. Obviously, this is we're talking about societies. People will just transgress it, but at least we have a framework with which to approach this question.
Right.
It's not ignoring it. It's not, let's not talk about it, it's okay. But the world is teaching us, So first of all, sexual education. You start from the basic and then you come up. Before discussing are we for or against, start with the basics first. Sexual education, availability of sexual and reproductive health tools, such as contraception. This is another discussion about sexual education.
Yeah.
That's a whole exactly. So before really coming to those bigger, divisive subjects, start with the basics. Okay. Kenya, and when they are still debating about legalizing that, but they created a specific center throughout the whole country. It's like the idea of when in Rwanda they did the one-stop center for GBV cases, gender-based violence. Here they did it, but only for generally women's health.
Okay.
It's called Mary Stop. So you'd find in Mary Stop centers only, that's when they are allowed to provide abortal care.
Right.
While they're still debating as a country to actually legalize it or not, at least for those specific cases that we know will end up being unsafe abortion, they will come with a lot of complications, which I think, by the way, I should maybe give a picture of so that, again, it gives a proper idea for the listener. Unsafe abortions, the reason why we cry about it, we scream about it, we write about it, is because it kills.
Yes.
It kills women. And self-abortion, there are women who just go to the bush or to an uncle or to a neighbor, and they just introduce sharp objects to open the cervix, remove everything. They cause traumas. They perforate the bowels. It's a mess. And then eventually that woman will end up in a hospital. Why? Because of a lot of complication, infection. Women are suffering just because of a shame, a mystical shame somehow, and all stemming from you were not presented about sex the right way initially. That's why we give our lives to people study a lot, people discuss about that, so that we find solutions, our solutions to our student problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think to close us off, we've touched on this already, but is it possible to reconcile this tension between Western liberalism and African traditionalism, which I think that's what you wrote talking about, that's one of the biggest hindrances. So is ever going to be a reconciliation? You mentioned that we need to define it, what abortion means for us as a culture, like how are we going to interpret it? So what's your view on that? Like, how do we as Africans go about addressing safe abortion practices within Africa?
Yeah, I think this will be a synthesis of what we've discussed again.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, the goal, yes, we can compare the African traditionalism with whatever Western liberalism, but the idea that a civilized Africa will eventually look like a civilized Western culture. It's again, it's too simplistic, really. We are actually not allowing ourselves to think more than that.
Right.
So before even dividing what is abortion or what is safe abortion or whatever, what is pregnancy first? What is the value of life in our culture? I think we should start from there. What is the value of life in our culture? Before we even discuss about having an abortion on request or whatever, what is life in our culture? In our own view as Africans, as Kenyans, again, we say African generally, but in your own community,
right,
as someone who is on the continent of Africa, because again, we vary a lot, but the idea is the same. What is the value of life? That's where we should start. What is the value of life? Before thinking about, removing that life, what is it? What are you removing? What is that? What is the value of that thing in your culture? I think it makes now your question way easier to answer.
Yeah.
It's actually not even a question to answer anymore once you ask what's the value of life.
Do you think it's because like not to touch on this too much, but do you think that whole traditionalism, it becomes more than a practical medicinal issue, becomes religious, and it becomes when you talk about culture, you're talking about people with entrenched beliefs. Do you think it's just harder to have these conversations, especially if you're like a policymaker? It's just easy to steer clear of that and just like let the people do as they wish, almost, without putting. What's your view on that, on the political side?
That's a very good question, and I think it is. Oh, absolutely, spiritual. Again, because the very core of this subject is societal. Right. Society is not about abortion is not just about medicine or clinical care or whatever. It's everything. It's spiritual. It's emotional for some, but it's actually at the very core of society. So yes, it is. We touch on that. If you cannot just ignore a culture just for the fact that even when you are presenting that idea, how will you present it? Will people even listen to you? If you are just coming, say, the statistics, the numbers say that we don't care. We have our own culture. That's why I think, which I think the more we talk about it, we are coming to the core of it, which is culture. Our own traditionalism, liberalism, or whatever. I think at the very core, we should ask ourselves, is our culture allowing us to solve our current problems, or is it not just? Because hanging on the idea of Africa traditionalism, while for the sake of that traditionalism, people are actually dying. What is exactly culture? If it's not a tool for solving our current issues, what is it for?
Right.
What is it for? So, which is what culture cannot be static. We cannot. I cannot hang on my culture, and my brother is dying because I have a culture.
Right.
Culture cannot be static. It has to be dynamic. It has to focus on the current issues. If you have found a problem, go to the next. There will be an underlying approach on life again, on the value of things. But the very purpose of that is to help you solve your issues as a community.
Right.
Okay. You can't just keep ignoring things in the name of culture and you are dying. Why? Find a new approach. Don't, again, on the other end, on the other extreme end, you just don't copy things from other people's culture just because, quote unquote, it's working. Who are you? It comes back to you. Who are you? You know?
Yourself.
So, yeah.
Well, Dr. Gateka Ndayisaba, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I've been practicing.
Oh, absolutely. You are pronouncing that right.
Thank you very much. This was informative, and I'm actually really enjoying this because I just browsed the Pan African Review website, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, and I just bothered them. I'm like, please give me his number. So I really appreciate it. I'd recommend anyone to read this article because I think it's time that we start having these conversations in Africa.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. This is actually my first time doing this, but
right,
it's okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good weekend.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for sticking with us till the end. Be sure to check out our website at panafricanreview.com, and we will see you guys in the next episode.